Hello, I'm Robert, fact checker and science blogger and helping people who are scared of Covid-19. And this is the WHO have just declared Covid-19 a pandemic, and we're getting lots of people posting to our group very scared. So they also made very clear in this same video that it's the first one in history that can be contained. They actually went so far as to say that the question is not whether it can be contained, it's just whether we will contain it. It is absolutely certain we know how to contain it. Several countries, quite a few countries have now shown how to contain it, both with small numbers of cases all the way up to over 100 with Singapore, several thousand with South Korea, and many thousands and tens of thousands with China. We absolutely know it can be done. It's just a question of whether we will do it. Now, you get all these people, there's the Angela Merkel, but she's not an epidemiologist, and she's just going by her experts, but her experts haven't been in China and studied it on the ground. And then there's the expert in the United Kingdom again saying the same thing. They're all saying, we can't stop it, it's just going to spread. All we can do is delay it, and we try to delay it until the end of the flu season, and millions of people are going to get it. But the WHO are the absolute experts on this. They deal with 200 epidemics a year, and how many epidemics do these experts that are saying that all these people are going to be, they mainly deal with flu. And whereas the WHO are all around the world, they're in sub-Saharan Africa fighting Ebola, they're fighting all the worst, yellow fever, they have got a wide experience of diseases, and this is not flu. It's a coronavirus. It is the very first coronavirus epidemic and very first pandemic, and it is very different from SARS. It's not the same disease as SARS. It behaves very differently. It is much harder it is not airborne, unlike SARS, which is. That makes a huge difference. It requires a very high viral load to infect someone. It's a lower respiratory tract disease. It has to go all the way down to lower respiratory tract in order to cause a severe disease, and it has very little affinity to the upper respiratory tract. All this makes it very different. So anyway, the rough notes that he said, I've summarised what he said. So first of all, they declared it a pandemic, so there's no precise explanation of what a pandemic is, but no precise definition. So they declared it more, it's not like a global emergency, health emergency. That is a legal thing. This is not a legal thing, it's just a word. But people have been nagging them for weeks, saying, you've got to call this a pandemic. And if it was flu, they would have called it a pandemic weeks ago. So they have to think very carefully. They said pandemic is not a word to use lightly or carelessly. It can cause unreasonable fear. It can lead, or it could cause unjustified acceptance. People just saying, we don't need to do anything to contain it anymore. And that will cause a great deal of unnecessary suffering and unnecessary death, because this one can be contained. And that is why they've been so careful about calling it pandemic, because they know it can be contained, and they are very, very concerned that calling it pandemic could lead to people stopping containing it, and then that would lead to a lot of unnecessary suffering and unnecessary death. It can be contained, it can be completely stopped. It's just a question of whether we will do this. And this is right. And every day since, they're just saying the way I listen to every single one of their press conferences I've listened to, and every time they have been calling on countries to take urgent and aggressive action, like they say, every single time, over and over and over, yet it's seldom reported. And they've kept saying, this can be contained, go ahead, do it. This is what you've got to do. This is our advice. This is the way to stop it. Do it now. And the country's just not listening. And they just keep saying this over and over again, multiple times every day. And they get journalists saying, are you going to call it a pandemic yet? Are you going to call it a pandemic yet? And they keep saying, no, it's not a pandemic, it can be contained. And journalists just say, are you going to call it a pandemic yet? Why aren't you calling it a pandemic yet? And they say, no, it's not a pandemic. They've been asked that almost every press conference, they are asked that, and they very patiently respond, it is not a pandemic and it can be contained. And now they're saying it is a pandemic, but it can be contained, and it'll be the first pandemic that we can stop. And they've made many specific recommendations, and some countries followed their advice quite quickly. For instance, Ghana very quickly decided to test everyone, do widespread testing, and lever into their flu testing. If Ghana can do it, why can't the UK? And why can't the US? And they're still not quite doing that yet. You're testing with your fever clinics, having anyone who comes in with a fever and who comes in with the flu, then they should be testing these people. They should be gearing up to be able to do lots and lots of tests for everyone who comes in like that. And the US, it seems, is at last waking up and realising it needs to do that, but it needed Italy to get all these vast numbers infected before the rest of the world realised what China has known all along and has been doing since early in January, that you have to test. And once it's got beyond the clusters, the first cases in clusters, you've got to test widespread throughout your population. So anyway, I'm so sorry, I'm digressing a bit. I meant to just read this out, but anyway, probably need a bit of background. So 90% of the cases are just 4 countries, they're saying, and 2 of those 4 have significantly declining cases. There are 81 countries that have no cases yet, 57 have 10 or less. And we can't say this loudly or clearly or often enough. And as I said, they've said it loudly, clearly, and many times on every single press conference. All countries can still change the course of this pandemic. If countries detect, test, treat, isolate, trace, and mobilise the people in their response, that's telling us all what to do, those with a handful can prevent them becoming clusters and prevent those clusters becoming community transmissions, and even the ones with community transmission or large clusters can turn the tide back and do as China did, or take it all the way back to single cases and then stop it. All countries can still turn the tide on this virus, even ones with community transmission or large clusters. So I suggest a little project you can do. Go and look at the news, watch the news stories, read the stories, and then find how many actually say this. How many of them report the WHO accurately and say that this is what they're saying. And they just have been consistently not reporting what the WHO say, or they say it a little aside, or they give the impression that the WHO don't know what they're talking about, when they are the absolute experts on this. And as you said, the challenge is not whether they can do the same, or whether they will. Here we are, this is more or less what they said. The challenge for many countries who are now dealing with large clusters of community transmission is not whether they can do the same, it is whether they will. And I'm in the UK, and sadly, we are following the much of the WHO advice now, thank goodness. But they're still doing it very sceptically and saying, we don't think this is going to be stopped, but we're sort of going through the motions, as it were. They're just trying to, they're doing it, well, they've just rebranded it. The UK call it delay, but they're doing the same things that the WHO are saying will stop it. But they're maybe not doing it quite thoroughly enough and aggressive enough. I'm sure the UK could do much more than it's doing. And the US is doing quite a lot now with its millions of tests. But still, we can all do more. And they said all countries must strike a fine balance between protecting health, minimise economic and social disruption, and respecting human rights. And the WHO, they can't tell anyone what to do. So they can only advise them, and sometimes countries are sovereign countries and they can do what they like. And if a country decides that it is not going to contain it, there's nothing the WHO can do to stop them. So it's solidarity. We all have to work together and do this, and pressurize your government and then do your own thing. I explained in my other video how we've as a personal level, you can stop yourself from getting the virus. So by washing your hands and not touching your face and keeping a distance from people coughing and sneezing, then you can be part of this whole process. Every country. So if, suppose some little country, I won't name any names, but suppose some little country just of a million people even says, oh, we're not going to bother doing anything, we're just going to let it spread. Then that'll become a million people who can spread it out to the rest of the world and become a big problem for everyone else. So we all have to stop it for everyone else. So they talk about all the things we have to do. They need to communicate to the public about risks and how to protect themselves. So that's the video I just did. So and the people should be on television. He explained that in South Korea, their Prime Minister is on television telling people over and over, this is what you've got to do. And I'm in the UK, we don't get Boris Johnson on television telling all of us, you've got to wash your hands and avoid touching your face. And it's just a minor item in our news from time to time. And this should be the big story. So we're doing a bit of this, but we're not, it really should be very much in the face that nobody can not know that this is what you've got to do. And they say that closing schools and borders and airports, and there's an awful lot of that going on, and it can slow down the spread, but it's a poor substitute. And if so far you've got very few cases, then closing things down is not going to help really. It's a very poor substitute, because with the contact tracing, you're chasing after the virus. And if you're doing social distancing, then you only do that once you've given up. You say, we don't know where the virus is now. We've stopped tracing it. It could be anywhere. Anyone could have it. And so we are just going to keep everyone isolated from everyone else. And that's much more damaging to your economy, much more disruptive than just contact tracing, following up the contacts of the people who have it, chasing after the virus and only isolating those people. So basically they're trying to isolate everyone in the society. It's just, instead of just isolating a handful or even a few thousand or tens of thousands, it's still far less disruptive than trying to isolate everyone, and a very pure substitute to try and get everyone to self-isolate. And you just can't do it for a whole country. Very difficult to keep that up. So it depends on the stage of the epidemic and sometimes on social acceptability. And with contact tracing, with chasing the virus, then you just need to isolate the people who could have it. And I talked a little bit about Iran, that they've got a high number of deaths and sick people, and there's a big problem, and we, as the solidarity, the importance of those of us, of other countries, to try and support Iran. And China there, and China, now that China's dealt with and pretty much eliminated its disease, but it's still got loads and loads of people on ventilators, and people are going to be on ECMO, artificial lungs, and they're going to be there for weeks still, because you have to, even after you've gone beyond the point where many people are now dying, the people who didn't die and are going to, or the severe cases, the few percent of the severe cases, the ones of those that didn't die, they take weeks and weeks, up to 6 weeks to recover. So there are going to be people stuck on ventilators in China for a fair while to come. And but even so, they've got a few that are spare now. So they've sent 1,000 ventilators. They're sending 1,000 ventilators to Italy. They've got a team in China and in Iran, and they're sending masks and personal protective equipment. So China is doing its bit to try and help others now that it's got a bit of spare capacity. And as a bit about the disease, the pandemic. It's quite repetitive. They sort of said in again what they said before, because the journalists were asking them, and they said, well, we just said, but didn't actually say it like that. So it's the WHO is not a trigger. It's not a mathematical formula. It's a call not to give up. And about how Iran, this is a bit about Iran. I explained that just now. And in Italy, they gave this rather striking figure at the time of the press conference yesterday. Nearly 900 people in Italy in intensive care, and that requires 2 to 3 health workers for each person. And then, because they got Covid-19, which is very infectious, then these 2 to 3 health workers all have to be in personal protection equipment for hours on end. And it's really quite uncomfortable and difficult, and most of them will not be used to using this equipment. So they all have to be trained, because your average hospital worker is not used to using personal protection equipment. And so it uses a lot of PPE. They get very exhausted. They're not used to working. It's hot, sweaty, difficult, wearing this stuff all the time. And they have to wear it for hours, and then they can't go to the toilet because they would have to put the whole thing on again, a new set of equipment if they did. And it's really quite difficult conditions, and they get exhausted quickly. And continuously you've got 2 to 3 people with each person looking after them. So Iran and Italy, so even a country with good healthcare, that's several thousand people looking after those 900 people in intensive care, doing very difficult work, and they have to have their personal protection equipment, new things every day. It's not easy, even for a country like Italy. And WHO have been saying this for weeks, that countries have to prepare and know that if it gets bad like Italy, this is what you're going to have to do, and be preparing and figuring out how you're going to deal with this difficult situation. So Iran is in a similar situation, and they need lots of supplies, just like Italy do. They need people from outside of Italy and outside of Iran to help them, because it overwhelms their own health system. Question about serology study, that's not terribly important. Well, it is important. We're going to know in the future things like how many school children have it. So it make a big difference. But what I mean is that we're not going to know for a few weeks, sadly. But it's a very big thing that they managed to get serology working so early on. This is an example of how fast the science is working. And then they ask, are countries taking enough measures? And the difficulty is if you don't suppress it. So this suppressing is very important to delay it as well. And otherwise it's going to overwhelm your health system while these people start building up the health system, which they should have done weeks ago. But WHO has been warning about this for weeks, but the UK is just sort of starting up, really thinking seriously about it now. And at the very least, the delaying it is going to flatten the curve and allow the health system to keep control. And it's not the time to move to mitigation only. You have to contain it and preparing the health system in case it escapes control. And Spain, France, Norway, Denmark, they've all had a big load of cases just sort of spill over from Italy. And so he gave the example of Spain. He said they're doing a very good job of it. And say, we don't want anyone to make a mistake about what they're saying. When they say this is a pandemic, they're not saying the world should move from containment to mitigation. As I said, they've said this over and over again, and I hope people will begin to report this. That's about how they can all stop it. So I've done a little summary. No, these are my rough notes, and then a summary of my rough notes. And I'm not, the WHO sadly don't release the official transcript until several days after the press conference. If only they would release the transcript on the very day. But sadly, no, they don't, so that's why I'm doing this. So yeah, this is all about, Africa is in quite a good situation because Congo, because this is basically because the WHO, they now have $300 million that has been contributed, which they're mainly using for strengthening countries with weaker healthcare systems, and things like taking extra condition equipment where it's needed. For instance, they sent lots of tests to Iran, which has quite a good healthcare system, but it's overwhelmed by this. So the WHO rushing tests and personal protection equipment to Iran, and so they're also they've been strengthening Africa ever since they got the first big payment of $123 million from the EU, which was a few weeks back. And that was such a positive news, hardly anyone reported it again. But that is why Africa is now reasonably safe from the virus. And in Africa, unlike in Europe, even though they've got limited resources, they are acting very, very promptly and doing the very much they can. They have a lot of experience of how bad something like Ebola can be in Africa, so it's no wonder they're taking this very, very seriously, far more seriously than Europe has been doing until recently. Nigeria, within 48 hours of the first case, immediately set up a 100-bed isolation service. And so the head of the Nigeria CDC was one of the 13 team of experts who were in China and fighting. And so he's come back to Nigeria with immediate experience of what it can do and what you have to do to stop it and what you have to do to be ready to handle it. And so Tedros is very happy with the progress in Africa. Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization. It's in progress. We continue to build on what they're doing, and Africa will continue to be their focus because it's so important. Because if it took off in, say, the Congo, this is the first case in the Congo, if it took off in the Congo in a big way, it'd be very, very difficult to stop it. And then it really would be endemic if there were thousands of cases in the Congo. But at the numbers they have at the moment, then the Congo is used to isolating patients for Ebola. And so it's and the WHO fortuitously has just stopped the Ebola, the most recent Ebola outbreak. So there's lots of equipment and facilities that are free that were used for Ebola that they're now using for Covid-19. So that's about the Italian strategic support. I've talked about that. Chinese numbers and South Korean numbers down dramatically. Now I've talked about all that. It explains the contact tracing is not expensive. Anyone can do it. They said that teams in Congo during the Ebola outbreak were following 25,000 people every day. And that's in the Congo, which is a very disadvantaged country and in the middle of a shooting war. And yet the teams were going around tracing contacts. And now you get countries in the West with a very advanced health system and lots of very wealthy countries that are giving up after a few thousand, saying, we can't trace 1,000 people. Who ever thought of tracing 1,000 people? And that is, you mustn't do that. It is very easy to do. It is not difficult. If the Congo can trace 25,000 people every day, then surely the UK can. And surely, I hope the UK aren't giving up yet. They did not name names, but they said that the countries who are giving up will know who they are. So apparently some countries have already given up on contact tracing far too soon. And they're saying, don't do that. This is very, very stupid to do that. That's me saying that. They were more polite. But it doesn't make sense to give up on contact tracing and then start doing social distancing and disrupting your entire economy rather than just chasing after all the individuals and chasing 25,000 people or 100,000 people in your country, instead saying we've got to isolate all 1 million people and stop it that way. It doesn't make sense. It's not sensible to do that. And contact tracing, And civil servants can do that, volunteers can do that, community organisations can do the contact tracing. And the various apps and things you can use, and various technical ways of doing it over the internet and so on. It's not difficult. It's not a question, again, as you said, it's not a question of whether you can do it. It can be done. It's just a question of whether you will do it. And it's not worth it. Is it worth not investing as much as you can in that to show it's not working? And then, meanwhile, being ready to prepare the system. And it's not people being, it's just people stuck in a rut. You know how you get stuck in a rut in your thinking? The people who've been dealing with flu outbreaks all their life, and they're just not used to dealing with a new kind of virus. And they haven't got much experience of anything else. You don't get Ebola very much, you don't get yellow fever. They're very much stuck in the rut of thinking an epidemic means flu. And then you deal with it like flu. This is not flu. You couldn't do this with flu. But you can do it with Covid-19. And we've got to get out of these ruts that we're in. And we've got to start doing these things that China and South Korea and many other countries have proven worked. So these are some of the things that the countries, it's a list somewhere of what the things, yeah, here we are, here's a list. So some of the things that they've seen, so he said that there's some countries with alarming levels of inaction, but he doesn't actually say. So he explains in his reply that Dr. Mike Ryan explains that the WHO doesn't criticise member states in public. They know who they are. And they work constructively. They tell them when they're doing what they're doing right and when they're not adequate. And other countries tell the WHO when they're not doing things right. So it's two ways. It's not just them telling them what they're doing constructively, what they're doing right. But here are some of the things they've seen. They've seen testing algorithms. I've got a list here, which is sort of a somewhat shorter version. Testing only a small portion of the people that are likely to have COVID-19. Over restrictive testing. Sometimes they only test people over a certain age, and only people who have already got the full symptoms of COVID-19. Some of the countries are still only testing travellers from China because they haven't updated their guidelines, even though China has pretty much contained it now. And they're not testing people from Italy or South Korea or Iran. And some countries have no system to prevent infections in hospitals, which is of course the worst place where it's going to be. Some countries are giving up contact tracing too soon. When, as I said, with the Congo tracing 25,000, there's no excuse at all for giving up contact tracing just because you are not used to tracing 1,000 people or a few thousand people. Some countries are not communicating well with the public, and they're with various confusion and issues of trust for the government. They're not just clearly saying this is what you have to do, and this is the situation. And they're not coordinating between the national and provincial government, and there's a lack of resilience and capacity because of the health system running lean and mean at 99% of capacity. So many of the best healthcare systems are running at 99% of capacity. They have very little capacity for this. And they are not building in resilience. They're just not taking the time to build in resilience, and they should do that long before it's needed. And the public with a deep distrust of government messaging. So all of this has to be turned around. And like when the countries eventually get it, like Italy did, but too little too late as it were, but it's not really too late because they can't stop it. So Italy is surging up with these huge numbers, but they are now doing everything and they're putting all into it. It's just that we need to do that. They should have done that weeks ago. And they should have prepared for this weeks ago. And I saw not singling out Italy for any particular reason. Many countries in that situation. So they're saying that all these countries, that they need, there's no point in going back and laying blame. You deal with the situation as it is now, and you move ahead. And so other countries have to learn from the examples, and they've got to learn that we've got to build that resilience now. We know what we're going to do, and we have to be doing all this testing and contact tracing and everything. We know it works. So anyway, they're talking about Ireland. Ireland's an example that's doing it well. And yeah, that's about, I just explained all that. and it's doing the right thing. So I've said everything. I didn't say it in quite the order they did, and I said things maybe a little bit less politely than they did. Sorry about that. But hopefully that this gives you some idea that this is not a pandemic. It can be contained, and it's just a question of they're absolutely clear. It's not a question of whether we can contain it. It's just a question of whether we will. And personally, I'm hopeful that when Italy contains it, so they're saying that it's a case of not whether you can, if you will. Well, Italy is putting an awful lot into containing its outbreak, so surely it's going to contain it. And it's very nerve-wracking to start with. They talked about that in the previous press conference, that as you start contact tracing, you have to start doing all contact tracing and chasing everyone up and finding all the mild cases, then your numbers are going to balloon hugely, because there are people who've already got it, but you're only just discovering them. And so Italy is in that process still. And so it's got vastly increasing number of cases, but a lot of them had it before. And then some of them have just recently been infected. So people who've been infected won't show the symptoms for quite a while. And that's why you get this big ballooning of cases once you start looking for them, once you know they're there. And then you've got to contain them, self-isolate. You're doing social distancing now because you've got so many that they're losing track of the contact tracing. And so Italy's doing everything right. And following the example of China and Wuhan and outside Wuhan in China, then what they're doing will contain it. But it'll take some days before you even start noticing that the cases are going down, and the new cases per day are going down. And you may be the end of next week, maybe the next week, they're not actually saying a time scale. But so my personal hope is that people have been ignoring South Korea, they've been ignoring China, they've been ignoring Singapore in the West, especially in Europe and the United States. But I think once they see Italy contain it, then maybe some of these pundits that have been saying we can't contain it is a bit closer to home, and they might start saying, well, it's not because it's a Confucian society. That would be an excuse you could say for South Korea, that they have a lot of respect for their elders and so on, and that's maybe why they can do it. And you could say for China, oh, it's because it's South Korea, of course, is a very open society, it's a democracy, just like any Western democracy, and that absolutely shows that an open society, an open democracy can stop it, and it makes a bit more respect for elders and seniors in South Korea. So you could say, oh, that's why they do it. It's just because they respect their old people. You could come up with some excuse like that. But if they come to Italy, then it's not a Confucian society. And then they go to China and say, oh, it's because it's a communist society, and they can stop it. But South Korea isn't communist. And so I think once we've got Italy, then it'd be very difficult for these epidemiologists sucking away all the influenza people to keep on saying, oh well, we can't do it because we're different from Italy. I mean, that'd be very difficult for them to say. So I'm rather hopeful that with it, that will be somewhat the turning point in terms of these suck in the mud kind of old people who just don't seem to have, old conservative in the scientific sense, not being able to change their ideas because they're so used to influenza. But this is not influenza, even though it's a respiratory disease. It can be contained. The WHO are the absolute experts on this sort of thing, and they have no doubt at all. And the 13 international experts who went all the way around China, so what they're doing, they had no doubt at all either that the world can stop this. It's not a question of if we can we? It's just a question of will we? So anyway, and I think we will. I'm optimistic about this because I approach as a mathematician, and I see things a bit differently. I'm not worried by vaccines in all these different countries. The main question is, are people in all these countries doing something to slow down the spread? And if we can even get 3/4 of those who would be infected not be infected, then it's going to stop. There's no doubt about it. And I've talked about it in my other videos, I don't want to repeat myself. So, anyway, I'll put a link to my other video about how you can stop it yourself. Make sure you don't get it and help stop it spread. And if 3/4 of us did that, it would stop. After a certain period of time, even without the governments doing anything. Hopefully this helps. I'm doing this for Doomsday Debunked on Facebook. Obviously for everyone else as well, but particularly to help the other people in the group. And if you are scared, then do join our group on Facebook, and be sure to read the rules at the top of the group, because they help to make it function properly. Lots of people are very scared, panicking, a lot of autistic people, and we need these very clear rules to make it work. So please read them carefully and follow the rules if you're joining the group. And we very much welcome people who are expert, people who are good at checking sources, and people who can share their own knowledge and experience of things, and people who are good at working with others who are panicking and scared, or explaining things in ordinary everyday language, or people who are very good at explaining things to autistic people who need things explained in a particular way before they can understand. If they are very autistic, then they need certain things you need to be careful about in order to explain things so that they can understand. Just a different way of using language. So anyway, if you want to do join the group, maybe see you there. And thanks for listening, and do subscribe to this channel if you want to see more videos like this. That's kind of obvious.